Hello, I'm Philip Bittner, and welcome to UATV's weekly roundup of events from our perspective here on the ground in Ukraine. In this edition, we will discuss Moscow's latest attacks against the civilians of this nation. We'll also talk about what is happening around the continent as European nations react to a new paradigm when it comes to an increasingly belligerent Russia and a potential withdrawal of involvement by Donald Trump's White House. But we start with how Ukraine keeps up the pressure with its attacks, and there's good news from Russia. Over the course of a week, strategic facilities on the territory of the Federation were attacked by hundreds of drones. For example, the Energia plant in the city of Yelets in the Lipetsk region burned brightly. The plant produces batteries for military purposes, for drones, missiles, and artillery systems, aviation, and the Navy.
Туши свет!
And this is Bolkhov Semiconductor Device Factory in the Oryol region. The plant is considered an important part of Russia's military-industrial complex. Its primary focus is the development and production of electronic components for radio-electronic equipment. The plant manufactures microchips, semiconductors, indicators, microassemblies, and eternal batteries for use in electronic systems. Its products are used in communication systems, control systems, electronic warfare systems, and simulators for tanks and missile systems. The plant collaborates with the Sovyezhdy concern and other organizations within the Russian defense industry. And what is Russia doing at this time? Bombing strategic objects in Ukraine? Of course not. The Russian leadership has repeatedly said that they want to destroy Ukrainians as a people, and they continue to show this with all their actions, bombing civilians. So, all last night, the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv, was subjected to a combined attack by ballistic missiles and attack drones. In this footage, you can see the aftermath of the strikes. According to rescuers, 15 people were injured. Serious damage was in 3 districts of the city. And again, non-strategic objects were attacked. A shopping center and a residential building. They were the ones that were targeted. The alarm from this attack lasted more than 7 hours. And such attacks continue throughout the country. This is how rescuers dismantled a house in Kherson, destroyed by Russian shelling. 1 person died there. And this is in the Kharkiv region, the village of Stary Saltov. The settlement was attacked overnight by Russian drones of the Iranian model type. And these are photos from the Donetsk region. There, on Tuesday night, the Russians shelled as many as 4 villages. It is noteworthy that ordinary 1- and 2-story rural houses, which couldn't be confused with military facilities, came under artillery fire. Russians are showing the world that they don't care about peace initiatives. They systematically destroy residential buildings, raze cities and villages to the ground, without regard for resources. So we ask, how do you like that, civilized world? What about Donald Trump, who took on the role of mediator in negotiations between Ukraine and Russia after Putin chickened out on going to Istanbul for talks with Zelensky and sent a delegation of people without authority instead? Everyone was waiting for the White House to react, and they waited for Trump and Putin to talk on the phone. What followed after that? Devastating sanctions? At least a condemnation? Let me remind you of Trump's comments.
And I believe he wants to stop. Look, I would be, I think, very able to tell whether or not he wanted to or what. I thought there was a very good chance, like a 50-50 chance, that he would say, I want to take the whole thing. I didn't know what he was going to say. And then they have a different kind of a problem. But I believe he wants to stop. Pretty sure.
Meanwhile, the Kremlin's inconsistent behavior has received a response in the U.S. Senate. A bill from Democrat Richard Blumenthal and Republican Lindsey Graham on destructive tariffs against Russia already has the support of 81 out of 100 senators. According to the bill, if Russia continues to shirk direct, serious peace talks, secondary tariffs that could be imposed have every chance of destroying the aggressor country's economy.
Russia can expect decisive action from the United States Senate. To that end, we are beyond pleased that we now have 81 co-sponsors for legislation to sanction Russia for its barbaric invasion of Ukraine. Our legislation will isolate Russia, putting it on trade island by imposing stiff tariffs on other countries that support these atrocities. From the official website of Democratic Senator Blumenthal.
Europe did not delay restrictions either. The European Union and the United Kingdom have introduced new sanctions against Russia. The so-called shadow fleet and facilities in the military, energy, and financial sectors of the Russian Federation are under attack. As the EU's chief diplomat Kaja Kallas stated, pressure on Moscow is increasing to force it to stop the war against Ukraine. Nikita Skoblikov speaks more about the new restrictions against the aggressor country.
The European Union has adopted its 17th package of sanctions against the Russian Federation. The measures target nearly 200 vessels from Russia's so-called shadow fleet and are aimed at countering other hybrid threats originating from Moscow.
The new measures also address hybrid threats and human rights. New sanctions against Russia are in the works. The longer Russia continues its war, the harsher our response will be. Kaja Kallas, High Representative of the EU for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy.
Kyiv welcomed the new restrictions. In particular, the head of the office of the President of Ukraine, Andriy Yermak, emphasized that the effort to increase pressure on Moscow is ongoing.
What's especially important is that tough sanctions are being imposed not only on Russian companies, but also on those from third countries, including Turkey, Vietnam, Uzbekistan, and the UAE, that have helped Russia's military-industrial complex circumvent restrictions and supplied components for drones and missiles. For the first time under the EU's hybrid threats framework, economic sanctions are being imposed in response to physical attacks in Estonia, sabotage of underwater cables, and support for pro-Russian demonstrations in Europe. Andriy Yermak, head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, via Telegram.
In coordination with the European Union, the United Kingdom has also announced a new sanctions package against Russia. The measures will target 100 entities across Russia's military, energy, and financial sectors. According to a statement on the UK government's official website, these sanctions are aimed at thwarting Putin's attempts to bypass previous restrictions and blocking his efforts to restore economic ties with the global community.
These measures target supply chains for Russia's lethal weapon systems, including Iskander missiles. This will save Ukrainian lives and strengthen our collective security by disrupting Russia's war machine. Every ruble we cut from the Kremlin's revenues reduces Putin's ability to sow chaos, division, and disorder around the world. And it protects the British people by enhancing our national security and prosperity. From a UK government statement.
The United States, meanwhile, is holding back despite having a robust sanctions bill ready. According to Secretary of State Marco Rubio, if there is no progress in peace negotiations, the U.S. Senate will begin advancing restrictive measures against the aggressor state. The proposal includes 500% tariffs on imports from countries that continue to purchase Russian oil, gas, or uranium. However, President Donald Trump has so far refrained from imposing new sanctions on Moscow, believing there is still a chance for progress in resolving the war Putin launched against Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky believes that U.S. sanctions would significantly accelerate the end of Russia's war against Ukraine.
When it comes to the U.S. package, it's a different story. We all need to work persistently with the U.S. so that at some point, when they're ready, they implement the appropriate sanctions. That would be a huge help sanctions in the banking and energy sectors. A lot depends on the United States whether Putin and the Russian army continue profiting from this war or not.
Unlike Washington, the European Union isn't waiting for Moscow to make a move before tightening restrictions. The EU's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas, stated that the bloc will ramp up pressure on Russia to bring it closer to peace. In this context, EU Trade Commissioner Valdis Dombrovskis told Reuters that Brussels will propose to the G7 finance ministers a revision of the current price cap on Russian seaborne oil. According to sources familiar with the negotiations, officials are considering lowering the current threshold from $60 to $50 per barrel. Reported by Nikita Skoblikov, UATV News.
Good news from the Romanian presidential elections. Pro-European candidate Nicurser Dan has been elected president of Romania, defeating the far-right anti-Ukrainian candidate George Simeon. According to Romania's National Election Authority, Dan received about 53.6% of the vote, while Simeon received 46.4%. Voter turnout reached 65%, the country's highest since 1996. The result comes as a strategic relief for Kiev. A victory by Simeon, who heads the ultra-nationalist Alliance for the Union of Romanians, or the AUR, would have threatened Romania's strong pro-Ukraine stance. Simeon has repeatedly voiced anti-Ukrainian views, called for halting military aid to Kiev, and is personally banned from entering both Ukraine and Moldova. However, the high ranking of the far-right candidate makes political scientists worried about the upcoming parliamentary elections in the country in 3 years.
Of course, it's worrying that the camp that rose enormously since last autumn, ultra-nationalists, anti-Europeans, gave us so much emotion, and it must be said that many Romanians were literally traumatized by what's been happening since last November. It was something unheard of in politics, this annulation of elections. We never had this, but as a replica too proud of being Romanian, cultivated by these fake patriots, I think we can say today we're proud to be Europeans.
This is the second attempt to hold presidential elections in Romania. The results of the first round, held last November, were annulled by the country's constitutional court on December 6th, 48 hours before the start of the second round. The country's authorities suspected candidate Călin Georgescu, who unexpectedly showed the best results in the first round, of manipulating votes on TikTok, and that Russia may be behind his victory. The results of the first round of the presidential election were nevertheless annulled on the basis of suspicions of Russian interference. The Romanian authorities also accuse him of violating the constitutional order and sympathizing with fascism. Elections were also held in Poland, the first round of voting for the country's president. The winner was Rafał Trzaskowski, a candidate from the ruling pro-European Civic Platform Party. It would seem to be a victory for common sense and a defeat for the pro-Russian forces, yes? But not everything is so clear-cut. The second place, with a gap of less than 2%, was taken by a representative of the right wing, Karol Nawrocki, and he has every chance of winning in the second round, because the third and fourth places were taken by very interesting figures.
We don't want Jews, homosexuals, abortion, taxes, and European Union. Sławomir Mencen, candidate for president of Poland.
Charming, isn't it? So we have an anti-Semitic, homophobic, and Eurosceptic in Mencen, and another ex-candidate, pro-Russian populist, Brown. Together, the representatives of the right-wing forces receiving more than 50% of the votes. And although Nawrocki, who made it to the second round, does not have such extraordinary views as his competitors in the first round, it is not excluded that he will make concessions to the radicals for the sake of votes. Then we will see a political crisis in Poland when the president is supported by the radicals and the parliament is in the hands of moderate centrists.
The elections in Poland and elections in Romania are equally important for NATO and Europe because of its geostrategic positioning at the eastern flank of NATO alliance. Now, we've secured elections in Romania with Mr. Dan, who is a liberal candidate, pro-EU and pro-NATO, sidelining the far-right nationalists. All eyes are on Poland, but the two elections are completely different because of their demographics, dynamics, and the issues that are raised in the campaigns.
Meanwhile, Europe is stepping up its readiness to potentially defend itself against Russian aggression. Germany is deploying an armored brigade to Lithuania to bolster NATO's eastern flank. Chancellor Friedrich Merz came to Vilnius for the opening of the military base, where he attended the ceremonies with President Gitanas Nausėda. The new unit, which consists of 4,800 troops and 200 civilians, aims to strengthen NATO's presence in the region in light of the threat posed by Russia. The deployment of German troops in Lithuania is expected to deter potential Russian aggression and provide additional protection for the Baltic states. According to Lithuania, the brigade, which will include an infantry battalion and a tank battalion, and it will be fully formed by 2027.
More than ever before, we depend on solidarity and friendship among liberal democracies. Peace in Europe has been broken. Each and every day, Russia is violating the order that we collectively adopted as a lesson from the horrors of the Second World War. With a criminal war of aggression against Ukraine, but also with attacks and murders in numerous European cities, with acts of espionage and sabotage, with cyber attacks, with systematic disinformation. We must be able to defend ourselves against such attacks at all times. Freedom is not for free.
By the end of the decade, NATO will be stronger and Russia will have a terrible hangover, wrote the Polish foreign minister on social media platform X. He recalled NATO was created to contain Russia, and it was Moscow that refused to follow the European path and decided to try and restore its empire. We will not allow this to happen, promised Radoslaw Sikorski. Andrei Dmitrenko tells how European countries are strengthening their defense capabilities.
NATO's mission in the Baltic Sea should not only continue but expand, said Lithuanian Foreign Minister Kęstutis Budrys. The operation, called Baltic Sentry, was launched in January 2025 to protect the underwater infrastructure of the Baltic Sea. After damage to submarine communication cables, governments in the region blamed sabotage. Calls to extend the mission gained further traction after a recent incident in international waters near the Gulf of Finland, when a Russian Shadow Fleet tanker refused to stop at the request of Estonia's navy.
The growing activity of the Shadow Fleet also means a greater military risk. If international law allows us to act, we must clearly define and apply it. Uncertainty only encourages violators to act more boldly. Kęstutis Budrys, Lithuanian Foreign Minister, at the Lennart Meri Conference in Tallinn.
NATO's role in securing European stability was also a key topic at the European Political Community Summit. Slovenian Prime Minister Robert Golob proposed combining national defense spending with contributions to EU defense initiatives under a single metric. He argues this would provide a fairer calculation of defense efforts, especially as NATO aims to boost defense budgets among its members. His Croatian counterpart backed the idea.
Regarding Rutte's proposal, we are going in that direction, and we have already committed to defence expenditures at 3% of GDP in the next several years. How much exactly we will commit to, we will see after the conclusion of the coming NATO summit. Andrej Plenković, Prime Minister of Croatia, at the European Political Community Summit.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte also plans to overhaul how defense budgets are calculated. According to media reports, he wants member states to allocate 5% of GDP toward the broader security sector by 2032, including direct investments in the defense industry, infrastructure, cybersecurity, and other areas. Washington believes this target is entirely realistic.
We are headed for a summit in 6 weeks in which virtually every member of NATO will be at or above 2%. But more importantly, many of them will be over 4%, and all will have agreed on a goal of reaching 5% over the next decade. It will be the first time ever in NATO's history where they have reached targets and goals that will allow NATO's partners to be more than 50% of the alliance. That's an historic moment if it comes to fruition. That's what was agreed upon today by the foreign ministers, Marco Rubio, US Secretary of State.
Defense ministers from France, Germany, Italy, Poland, and the UK met in Rome in the E5 format to discuss the growing defense spending and reshaping Europe's security architecture. Ukraine's allies confirmed they would increase military aid. UK Defense Secretary John Healey emphasized that Russia is still unwilling to negotiate peace, and that the pressure on Moscow must grow.
We now have to put pressure on Putin in every way we can, so that's a combination of military support for Ukraine in the way that we are, diplomatic pressure and economic pressure where we can as well. We will do our bit as the E5 defense ministers and E5 nations, but the more this effort on all flanks is coordinated with more nations, the more effective it's likely to be.
The European Union also pledged continued support for Ukraine's defense. According to Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal, EU partners will allocate 1.9 billion euros in military aid from frozen Russian assets. In addition, the head of the EU Military Committee, Robert Brieger, announced that in 2025, the bloc could double its deliveries of large-caliber ammunition to Ukraine. Brussels aims to send 2 million shells by the end of the year, reported by Andriy Dimitrenko, UATV News.
Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese confirmed the fleet of second-hand M1A1 Abrams battle tanks are on the way to Ukraine, and that was also reported by the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. The first of the 49 vehicles loaded aboard a cargo ship recently, but the government will not disclose the current location nor the expected arrival date for security reasons. The White House is not too happy with this decision, although Washington officially gave the green light for the transfer. Allegedly, in private, American officials have responded that they remained disappointed, though.
Last year, even before Donald Trump returned as president, we warned the Australians that sending these Abrams tanks would be complicated, and once they finally get to the battlefield, the Ukrainians will find them difficult to sustain. One U.S. official to the AABC, speaking on the condition of anonymity.
Belgium will provide Ukraine with a large package of military aid. We're talking about equipment worth more than €1 billion. In the new aid package, Ukraine can count on the rapid delivery of about 100 armored ambulances and Unimog transport vehicles, as well as weapons and guns. According to Defense Minister Theo Franken, the bulk of the aid, €645 million, is of Belgian origin, but the Belgians will also transfer to Ukraine 5 unmanned naval vessels and other drones, helmets, medical equipment, portable drone detection systems, night vision goggles, and protective clothing against chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear threats. In addition, more than 16,000 weapons and guns will be delivered, as well as 20 modernized Cerber-type anti-aircraft systems and a Leopard battle tank with a modernized gun turret for testing. Belgium is also investing in training Ukrainian F-16 maintenance technicians as part of the coalition in cooperation with the Belgian defense industry. But not all European countries act as allies towards Ukraine. And here, as often happens, the conversation turns to Viktor Orban. After multiple blockings of aid to Ukraine and new sanctions against Russia, he has found himself a new hobby: Now the Hungarian prime minister is catching Ukrainian spies in his country. It is not entirely clear what they're supposed to do there, but Orban and his team have taken up the new occupation with all their passion. My colleagues will tell you the details.
Hungarian special services announced the exposure of 2 alleged Ukrainian spies. According to government spokesperson Zoltán Kovács, the individuals in question are Roland Seber and István Holló. Their supposed goal was to discredit Hungary on the international stage.
Roland Seber, an illegal officer of Ukrainian intelligence, built ties with opposition figures. István Holló is under criminal investigation for espionage. Mr. Seber organized meetings with political and military figures to sway Hungary's stance on the Ukraine conflict. His growing influence led to a travel ban in 2024. Mr. Holló, a pure Ukrainian national, sought military and energy intel linked to Ukraine's war demands. Zoltán Kovács, State Secretary for International Communication of Hungary, on X.
This is not the first time Hungary has identified so-called Ukrainian agents. On May 9th, Hungary's Counterterrorism Center detained a former Ukrainian diplomat in Budapest. According to Hungarian media outlet Telex, the man worked at the Ukrainian embassy in Hungary in the 2010s. He is now accused of espionage, allegedly posing a threat to Hungarian sovereignty.
After clarifying the situation, authorities deported a middle-aged man from Hungary overnight as his activities posed a serious threat to our country's sovereignty. This individual previously operated under diplomatic cover, but his official status has since expired. From a statement by the Hungarian government on Facebook, we expelled 2 spies who were operating under diplomatic cover at the Ukrainian embassy in Budapest. The relevant decision and note were handed to the Ukrainian ambassador in Budapest, here at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Ukraine's foreign ministry called the accusations, detention, and deportation of the Ukrainian citizen baseless, labeling it a witch hunt.
When evidence runs out, the witch hunt begins. It is high time Hungarian authorities put an end to the senseless, anti-Ukrainian hysteria. Georgi Tiki, spokesperson for Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, on X,
Budapest's claims of exposing so-called Ukrainian spies came immediately after a statement from Ukraine's security service, SBU. The SBU announced it had, for the first time, uncovered a network of Hungarian military intelligence agents operating in Ukraine to the detriment of the state. The spies allegedly collected data on Zakarpattia's military defenses, sought vulnerabilities in ground and air defense systems, and studied local residents' socio-political views, exploring how Zakarpattians might react to a potential Hungarian military takeover of the region. The SBU detained 2 agents.
The curator of both individuals was a career officer of Hungarian military intelligence, whose identity has been established by the security service. One of the agents was a 40-year-old former serviceman from the Berhov district, recruited by foreign intelligence and placed on standby in 2021. The other detainee was a former servicewoman of Ukraine's security and defense forces, discharged from her unit in 2025. According to available information, her tasks included informing Hungarian intelligence about the presence of aircraft and helicopters in Zakarpattia region, as well as the defense systems of the military unit where she served.
Budapest, as expected, denies the allegations. The Hungarian government accused Kiev of propaganda. The 2 countries exchanged diplomat expulsions.
Our ambassador in Budapest was summoned, and the Hungarian side handed him a note demanding that 2 of our diplomats leave Hungary within 48 hours. In response to such unfriendly and provocative actions by Hungary, my deputy summoned the Hungarian ambassador in Kyiv and handed him a corresponding note demanding that 2 Hungarian diplomats leave Ukraine within 48 hours. Andriy Sybiha, Ukraine's foreign minister, on the United News telethon.
Hungary regularly blocks EU initiatives in support of Ukraine, such as imposing anti-Russian sanctions or extending existing restrictions. Moreover, for nearly a year, Budapest has prevented the start of negotiations on Ukraine's EU accession, citing the situation of ethnic Hungarians in Ukraine as a pretext. To move forward with the talks, Ukrainian and Hungarian delegations met in Budapest on April 29th and agreed to begin regular consultations. The first was scheduled for May 12th. However, after the SBU exposed the Hungarian intelligence network in Ukraine on May 9th, Budapest canceled the consultations. The future of the negotiations remains unclear. Hungary's foreign ministry briefly stated that it allegedly remains open to dialogue with Ukraine, while Kiev insists on resuming consultations. Reported by Valeria Nekipolova, UATV News.
Well, that is it for us this week on Weekly Wrap-Up for UATV. I've been your host, Philip Ittner. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope you've learned something new and informative. We will return next week with another edition because in modern warfare, we cannot allow Moscow to be the one dictating what is happening in the information battle space.